London Calling is the third studio album by The Clash. Released in 1979, the album is a musical melting pot representing seemingly diverse musical styles, but ones that hold a similar ethos and energy. Fusing punk with reggae, rock and pop, and even rockabilly, they unleashed a double album that would become their biggest selling record and an important chapter in rock music as a whole. They'd already begun to evolve away from a pure punk style with their album Give 'Em Enough Rope released the year before, and the subsequent tour saw them perform with many artists that were far from their normal crowd. Following this tour, the band reconvened for rehearsals at Vanilla Studios in Pimlico, with no new material but with lots of enthusiasm for running through some old covers and trying out anything regardless of style. They even barred anybody from outside the band from attending, so as not to receive any outside influence at all. One of these covers was the Vince Taylor song Brand New Cadillac, which was later recorded for the album in just one take. Revolution Rock and Wrong and Boyo were two reggae covers they played that also ended up on the album. Once they'd amassed enough original material, it was time to head to the studio proper with producer Guy Stevens. Their choice of producer wasn't popular with their label CBS, however. His alcohol and drug issues were seen as a problem, not to mention his unusual methods of communication. Known for throwing objects around the studio, his approach was far from typical, but importantly, welcomed by the band. Joe Strummer recalls, "I remember searching through all of the pubs off Oxford Street looking for him. I found a row of blokes sitting at the bar, slumped over and staring into their beer. I looked down this row, then I spotted Guy because of his woolly hat. I went up to him and tapped him on the shoulder. He looked round, and it was just like one of those son finds father scenes in a corny film. He looked up at me and said, 'Hey, have a drink.' He had a few bust-ups during the sessions," Mick Jones added. He had one with Maurice Oberstein, head of CBS UK, where he lay in front of his Rolls Royce. He had fights with engineer Bill Price too. He employed his normal eccentric production techniques, but also some new ones, like blowing the mixing desk up and hitting the guitarist with a ladder. All these things we could take, but pouring wine into the grand piano, we nearly killed him for that. But we highly recommend him to anybody that wants to make a great record. For the more technical aspects of capturing the band's sound at Wessex Studios, they were in the very capable hands of engineer Bill Price." Price said of Guy, "Guy was a very unusual record producer. He believed that the record producer's job was to maximise the emotion and feeling, and Guy did this thing that I called direct injection. He would challenge the artist verbally and physically, tackle him and bring him to the ground and punch him and stuff, in order to get more emotion out of him when he performed. Funnily enough, this worked better on some people than others. It worked very well with Joe, actually." For Topper Headon's drums, Bill placed a pair of Neumann U87s about 15 feet up and 10 feet in front of the drum kit as ambience mics, and mixed them in with a pair of STC 4038 ribbon mics placed behind the kit at floor level. On the song London Calling, Price recorded the stereo ambience mix onto 2 tracks, and recorded the same ambience mix onto another 2 tracks, but gated through Kepex gates and triggered by the snare mic. Having gated ambience tracks gave Price more control over the snare ambience, he said. "Depending on how loud the snare was, I could balance it in the overall mix by using the gated ambience. If the snare was too ambient, I could reverse the phase of the gated ambience tracks and reduce the amount of snare ambience, which I did on occasion. It works very well." For close mics, Price used both the Shure SM57 and a Neumann KM86 on the snare, Sennheiser 421s on the toms, and AKG 451s on the cymbals. Headon's kit had 2 hi-hats, which were mic'd with Neumann KM84s. On the bass drum, Price used both an AKG D12 placed inside the shell and a Neumann U47 placed just outside. Using a tube condenser to mic a kick drum was at one time unheard of, and would definitely have been frowned upon at Decca Studios, where Price first began his engineering career. The older guys at Decca, the people that I learned from, used to laugh at me for putting a mic on the bass drum at all. They used to say to me, "The object of the bass drum is to keep the band in time, it's not meant to be heard." They did teach me a lot, but that was one of the things they told me that I didn't believe. The electric guitars of Mick Jones and Joe Strummer were both mic'd with an Electrovoice RE20 mixed with a Neumann U87. Strummer mostly played a 66 Telecaster into a Fender Twin Reverb, although he did have a 50s Fender Esquire to hand also. Jones mainly used Mesa Boogie combo amps, particularly the Mark I and Mark II, which he would use to feed a Marshall 4x12 cabinet His guitars are more varied though, and included a selection of Les Pauls, with a Sunburst 58 Standard, a Black 65 Custom, and two 70s custom models in red and white. He also used a late 70s black Fender Stratocaster, which was gifted to him by Fender. He used this on Jimmy Jazz. Paul Simonon played his Fender Precision into an Ampeg SVT amp, with Price mixing an instrumental DI with a Neumann U87 on the cabinet. For effects, Mick Jones was very much into expanding their sonic palette, bringing in the Roland RE501 chorus, which can be heard on Lost in the Supermarket and Coca-Cola. He also had a Roland 201 Space Echo, which can be heard on Train in Vain. He used the MXR Phase 100 across the album also, for instance on the bridge of The Clampdown, and the solo in Spanish Bombs. For vocals, Price preferred to use a Neumann U47, but for Strummer, this proved to be less than ideal, he said. Joe had a very bassy voice, and was also undergoing a lot of dental work. This meant if I used the 47, I had to put so much high-frequency EQ on it that Joe's sibilance turned almost into a distorted lisp. The answer was an SM58, which gave punch and clarity without needing too much EQ. The recording took around 6 weeks in the end, with the band working 18-hour days, and from a starting point of no new songs, it ended up being a prolific success, producing more songs than would fit on a normal record, so the band really wanted to release a double album, but for the same price as a single album. Naturally, their label CBS weren't exactly on board with this idea, so the band countered, suggesting that maybe the album could have an accompanying bonus single with it instead. They agreed to this, only for the band then to turn the single into a 12-inch, one which included all 8 songs that were recorded but not featured on the first record. They even snuck in an extra song on top of this, as at the last minute they finished Train in Vain. So last minute in fact, that it didn't originally appear on the credits. CBS did honour this deal and released it as a double album, amazingly for the same price as a single album. The famous cover shot by Penny Smith captures a moment of anger at the Palladium in New York City on the 21st of September 1979. Frustrated by the venue's bouncers not allowing punters to stand and dance throughout the show, Simonon released his rage by going full Pete Townsend and smashing his precision bass to pieces. These pieces were later gathered though, and the instrument has since been on display. The image became the album's cover shot, adorned with an homage to the first Elvis album. Released in the UK in December 1979 and January 1980 in the US, success, selling 2 million copies upon release. It was a critical success too, with the New York Times remarking, "This is an album that captures all the Clash's primal energy, combines it with a brilliant production job by Guy Stevens, and reveals depths of invention and creativity barely suggested by the band's previous work." Not all opinions were favourable though, with UK's Sounds magazine saying, "The Clash had retrogressed to Rolling Stone style outlaw imagery and tired old rock cliches." Opinions like this were in the minority though, and it's since been regarded as one of the great rock albums and a fantastic snapshot of those exciting early post-punk days.